we've we've got now we've got fire risk assessments, we've got EWS, the external wall survey assessments, and we've got now the safety case reports, and all of those are things that have got to be done that can then be checked to see if you've done them or not. The challenge with that is that the day after they've been done, they can no longer be valid because circumstances can have changed. And this is a common problem that we come across with fire risk assessments, because they will be referencing information about a particular condition or a particular asset or system. And then if that may be corrected the following day or following week because of actions, and therefore the fire risk assessment arguably should be redone. But the fire management system is what the fire risk assessment actually comes from. And exactly the same with the building safety case. It's I think the legislation or the requirement for the regulator is that you've got in place a safety management system that is then ongoing, and then the safety case report is really there to illustrate that you've that you've got something that's compliant. But then if something changes, like an asset coming out of commission or a space becoming at risk, then that needs to be reported. Because the say so that's broadly the concept. Now, to do that, there's a whole range of things that we need to know about the building, the systems that are protecting the people and the spaces, and what components and elements go into that. So that sort of feeds into what we're trying to do within BIM for housing. So that was it, Richard, really.
Okay, well, let's have a look. I've got a little grid here, which I'm not going to share because I don't think you'll be able to read it. We've got a number of comments. Before we get on to actually the individual questions itself, we've got some comments that are quite interesting. Question answer 13. Alan has suggested that we add, along with defined boundaries, timeframes, and events that trigger mandatory updates for different assets or project development. And I suggest we put responsibilities in there as well. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Does anyone disagree with that?
I don't.
No, I'm going to take that as a no then. We've also got Paul White suggests that number answers 5, 11, and 15 are all around competence, which is pretty much covered under number 8, which is maintain a live record of building safety data with auditable changes and retention of historic information. I think he's probably right that we could just make that answer a little bit longer and cover everything in the other 3. Does anybody have any a view on that? George, what do you think about that? That's your subject, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing is that what we've got here is a brain dump of people who are experts in different areas. And obviously, we're going to get a degree of repetition and that needs to refining. And I think it's always a good idea to try and come up with 3 or 4 things at a push, maybe 5, rather than 20. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. Okay. Right. Well, as I say, we've had a number of people have given us their top 3 priorities on this list of answers. So I'm going to pick the most popular ones. We're going to start with number 1. Let's have a discussion around a robust change management process should be followed throughout the entire project. that is the most popular priority that we've got. Who's got something to say on that? If you don't volunteer, I will pick on you. Okay.
I'll come in on there. Yeah, I mean, I picked this one as well, and I think it's quite important that from the start, from the development, we capture everything. I think what's usually happened is if it's had to go back through planning, then it's been captured. And again, it'll happen the same with the gateways, I guess. When it has to go through Gateway 1, they're going to capture anything from Gateway 1 to Gateway 2, that changes. And that has to go back through the gateways, doesn't it? But it's not always those major structural bits that we need to capture, is it? It's a material change, and especially if it's a product material that's gone from combustible to, from non-combustible to combustible. So I think it's really, really important that we get something that's standardized, I think, to say what those items might be that we might need to pick up on the change management process to make sure that it goes through to the safety case, and therefore we can update the regulator with it. So I'm sort of thinking, you know, the gateways will capture the big things, but the other things that are really, really quite important to maintaining compartmentation, etc., that goes to the safety case, won't be picked up still through the gateways. So I think it's yeah, we need something that's going to make sure that any changes reflect both in the safety case and on as built drawings as well. You know, we can update drawings to show what materials have changed as well. So I think it is quite important, really. We're picking up those smaller items as well.
Paul White, do you think that can we standardise this?
I think we probably can. It's just, well, some people are as old as me who were brought up in engineering. You did change management all the time, so you just you get it signed off by somebody more senior. I think we've drifted into a peer now rather than somebody more senior, but you just need that clear responsibility for somebody who actually knows what's going on because they know what all the changes have been.
Okay, anybody else want to come in on this one?
I find that a number of consultants will refuse to provide as-built drawings. It's very common because they have not been directly involved in the work. They flat out refuse to produce as-built drawings.
Well, surely that's A, contractual, and B, a requirement of the regulator. So I don't think they can refuse for much longer.
Well, this is the thing. It seems to be the prevailing position of architects. I mean, it's not a cost thing. Obviously, we need to pay them to do that, and that's not really the issue. It's that they believe it contravenes their insurance requirements, which potentially I would take with a pinch of salt, but nevertheless, they refuse. And this is a number of big name architects.
Should it be down to the architect to do it, Ben?
Well, the architect's drawings define what's supposed to be done, and then you have trade contractors who may make some minor amendments in accordance with, you know, their materials and whatnot. But the architect should then update their details in accordance with the trade contractor's information. So, you know, they're not really taking on any additional liability because the trade contractor has, you know, implemented in line with the architect's specification, and then, you know, any changes that were necessary, the architect should, you know, incorporate those. Otherwise, you know, in 10 years' time, someone could open that architect's drawing and think that that's what was built, and it's not.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in again, but the point about which I have made in other meetings is the information presented at Gateway 3 must match what's in Gateway 2 for HRBs, and if it doesn't, then order change control has to be in place. So this should end up being a basis where the drawings are updated all the time, because that's what required. Because if you get to Gateway 3 and they don't match, then you ain't opening your building. So
this is the thing. I think someone needs to tell the RIBA this and get their members to comply with the regulations.
I think, sorry, George. I think it comes down to who's actually responsible for these drawings, and is it one of the contractors? Is it one of the consultants? But the point is whatever you have at Gateway 2, whatever those drawings are, that's what you're building. And if you don't build that, then you've got to have proper change control. And it doesn't matter who it is, you're in that process now. So it depends on who's responsible for keeping those up to date. And yeah, that's the whole key to this whole system, is you build what you've been told. And if you don't build what you've been told, you've got the change route.
Yeah. Johnny's got his hand
Johnny,
up.
Sorry, can I just, Johnny?
Thank you. Sorry, just a quick question. Sorry, I know I haven't been in very many of these forums for a while. Are we, on this particular question that we're looking at around keeping data live, is this throughout the whole life cycle, or are we more focused on design and design construction phase, or are we talking about the asset owner phase?
The asset owner phase. Yeah, but the point that I think Ben's making is, I think quite correctly, is that for that to be manageable, you've got to have the right quality of information at handover anyway. Is that right, Ben?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
there's no point in having drawings in your golden thread that don't show what you've built.
I completely agree, but in theory, building shouldn't get signed off at Gateway 3 unless that information is correct. Now, it may not. There's a separate question of, is all the information that's signed off at Gateway 3 the information that somebody needs to operate a building? For instance, as in some people were talking about here about the information going out of date, and I think that's a different question, because you can have enough design information to pass Gateway 3, hand over a building. But for instance, if you take, for instance, a lift, and as back to George's point of, if something changes at the start, so for instance, somebody could reprogram the lift to, instead of dropping to ground floor when the alarm goes off, it goes to the 5th floor, for instance. That's never going to be information that's particularly captured. So I think it's back to the original question is, I think the starting point for this should be the information that's given over at Gateway 3 is correct, but it may not be all of what you need, and then it's up to the owner to decide what information they do need.
I would say that, an alternate grounding level on a lift should absolutely be captured in your cause and effect matrix.
Absolutely, but it's not. But that's what I mean. It's only right at handover. So of how it or what it does at grounding should be captured in fire strategy and in your cause and effect. And then the question I think here is when that changes, how do you know it changes? So that so back to George's point, that you keep your your information correct and up to date.
Ben, could I just say, one of the things that I'm sort of questioning at the moment is whether the architect would be the right person to do that, because a lot of the things that you need to record would be M&E. So if we actually look at, if I may just for a second, we've gone through an exercise of looking at Regulation 38 in terms of the fire assets. So if you look at this, obviously, I think compartmentation and cavity barriers, yes, you'd probably say, and probably the fire doors would be under the remit of the architect, but the dampers and a lot of this these items here would be from specialists, wouldn't they? So
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the scope of what you're actually asking the architect to do.
I think what I mean, I'm using the architects as an example because they're the main protagonists of this issue. But all consultants should update their information in all disciplines, respectively. The architects are the ones that are refusing to do so. Facade consultants, not an issue. They will actively encourage and cross-check and ensure that their specification is continuously updated as the project progresses. We have no issue with that. M&E consultants, again, we don't tend to have an issue with that, because the discipline has a lot more sub-disciplines within it. They're quite good at navigating that and ensuring that they provide an overarching specification which which refers you to trade contractors and specialist information within it, such that it hangs together as a complete set of information.
But updating the location, for example, so invariably, what the designer would put in their design as to where the ductwork dampers go, etc., and also fire stopping and things like that, that will invariably change because the trade contractor will have slightly different products or slightly different routes. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but that's
I want to bring Colin White in. Actually, he's been waiting quite patiently.
Okay, sorry,
Colin. Sorry.
Good morning. Start off with what Paul White mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. Surely it is a contractual issue. I thought it's incumbent upon the main contractors, before they hand their buildings over to the owners, they have to provide all this information. I mean, I'm older than Paul, but Christ, back in the late 60s when I started, I spent most of my early apprenticeship compiling as fixed details down to the last nut and bolt that went in on systems. And to a certain degree, we still do that with the products that I'm involved with at the moment. They are part of a system, and somebody else mentioned the systems. It's not just about how the architect has drawn his building with his block work or his dry lining walls and stuff like that. There are all these systems in there that are important, and I'm not sure how you can control change management. Even this week, I have a situation where we've supplied 86 smoke vent control panels to a particular project in London. It's been going on and it's just getting to commissioning stage. We produced all the as fixed panel drawings that shows what's connected to what. And I know, sorry, it's hearsay, but I've been asked by the commissioning engineer, nothing to do with us, it was a totally separate thing. The commissioning engineer has told me that some of our as-fixed drawings are wrong because the services contractor, the electrician, M&E contractor, has decided it's easier to connect certain ventilators and windows being acted as fresh air windows to different panels. And
exactly.
I've got the conundrum. I don't know what to do. Do I ring up my client and say, somebody's told me, something's going on site? But it's how do you control that?
I absolutely agree, and I think that's a really important point. I guess that's what I'm saying as well. That the workflow at the moment, Ben, because obviously, you're able to control your supply chain, aren't you? And I imagine that you will build into your contract that they, somebody has to update create an updated model. But I have to say that I think we're very fortunate. We we get involved as ActivePlan. We get involved in a lot of handover information, and you're lucky if you've got a set of drawings that are named as built. You know, most of them don't even, you know, they're even stamped as you know,
Final construction.
yeah.
Okay,
Correct.
let me bring
a change in mind to as supplied.
It's a total, you know, in engineering, it just would be completely alien concept. You just would not tolerate it. And
Okay,
in
let me bring Paul
it
White
seems
into
to be
this.
normal.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, let's say that was the engineering point is you know, you don't change a pattern for a valve unless it's been signed off in triplicate, because if you do, you've got no control about what happens to it and you don't know what you did. But in terms of what we're looking at here is I think we're looking at with the HRBs, we've got this gateway 3, which is the audit of, in theory, has it been built? But actually that audit goes one step further in the fact that somebody's actually got to go around and check it, physically check it. And then potentially what we're talking about here is the handover information. All these drawings are going to have to go over to the client, the owner, whoever it happens to be. But then they need to audit it again for all the reasons that we've just discussed. They've got to understand it, and then they've got to introduce that into a system where they are then able to change the drawings. So there's potentially a whole new industry turning up here, which is somebody who can support a building owner to hold the drawings, hold the BIM information, and update it as necessary. Because I'm sorry, but you know, the appointed person is not going to be capable. They've probably never seen a CAD station or a BIM station or a model station that they could even interrogate or change. And I think these are one of the things that we need to make very obvious to people, that they need drawings that they can manage change with.
Yes, and rather than just a series of PDFs that you can't edit, you know. Yes.
Rene.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, so maybe I've attended a few just kind of fly in the wall. Just my kind of input, and I agree what the conclusion we just got to, that what people don't understand is that literally what they don't understand is that it's not just changing information. It's going to be drawings, it's going to be potentially models that needs to be changed, and the operations teams do not understand that. So you need to build a complete approach for that, a structure and a strategy, and that architect might not be around anymore, or any of those consultants might not be around. So you might have to have a vehicle to pass on to someone else that they can then do an update. So I think platforms is a key player in this. But so yeah, it's and the whole thing about live information, I don't think the regulator is going to expect you to, you know, every 5 seconds or every change immediately show that. They'll come to you and say, well, look, what's your status at the moment? But you should have something in place to say, well, I'm in the process of doing a review of my, you know, fire equipment or fire doors, but I'm aware of it, and in a week it will be done, you know, at that point.
Yeah, I
and
think
that can only be done with operations software or a platform that becomes the funnel that keeps track of this, that links all of the information and everything together. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Rene. Yeah, just to clarify, the regulator requires, or the regulations require, as I understand it, that if there's something changes that impacts on safety, let's say, for example, as Johnny was saying there, somebody reconfigures the lift, or let's say an AOV goes out or something like that, those are all notifiable changes, and therefore
that is during construction, or
no, during operations.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're impacted. Well, maybe somebody else here on the call. I'm fairly confident.
You don't need to know. There's no need once the building is complete to notify the regulator of a change to how the building designs or operations, unless the changes, it's essentially unless it's big enough that you're essentially going back in and getting building control again. So, for instance,
sorry to contradict you, Johnny, but if a system or an asset that is part of the safety management system of that building fails, then there's a duty on the responsible person to act on that and ensure that the building is and that can include.
Correct, but they don't need to notify the regulator.
No.
Not the regulator perhaps, but the if it's the fire safety side of things, they and an AOV goes out. My understanding is that they're supposed to let the local fire brigade know that if it's impacting on safety.
Yeah, so potentially, so it depends on the extent. So say, for instance, you have an AOV breaks in the building, depending on what happens. So if inside your safety management plan for the building and inside your building safety case and all the other information, you may have a backup plan for that, and you ideally should have considered it. So the consideration might be that it needs to be repaired, but it doesn't. There is enough redundancy in the system that one AOV is still, the building is still, operational.
Yes.
It may be then though that if there's only one AOV in the building and if that breaks, then the backup might be that you need to have wake watch perhaps in the building, or there could be some other measure perhaps in the building. In some of those instances, you're right that your plan will say to the fire brigade that yes, I will notify the fire brigade that that the building is now not operating how it should, so that they understand that in case there is an incident. So yeah, but it all comes back down to your plan, and a big part of it is are you doing what you are saying you are doing in your building safety case and in your building safety management plans. So yeah, so I think in the operation phase, it's very much how you do that. But the big question is how do you, for instance, and which I think is the question of this meeting, is how do you know when that happens? How does the right people know when an AOV fails, so that the measures are put in place to take the appropriate action and inform the appropriate people? So how do you keep your information up to date? So for instance, if the AOV failed, you may go from a stay put policy to a simultaneous evacuation policy, perhaps. And if that is the case, then obviously, people need to be notified, primarily to people living in the building. So I think it's about how do you make sure that happens in a live environment. From my point of view, I think people need to look at is doing it with the critical information, so your major life safety systems and the major bits of equipment inside it, and not look at every single little piece of information. So if one, for instance, door maglock breaks, yes, your door is part of your life safety system for smoke control, but it doesn't make any difference, because if it fails, it should be failing open, and therefore you might have a security issue in the building, but you certainly don't have a fire safety issue in the building. So I think it's about people understanding what it is that really makes up their golden thread of the critical building safety information, and how do you get that live rather than trying to get everything live. Like there should be nothing that ever changes on a drawing in day-to-day operations that you should ever have to have live. You just don't. None of this, like for instance, you're not on a live basis moving an AOV, if that makes sense. That's a big change that can go through a change management process. I think the live bit really comes into data points like that. So I think Richard,
Sorry.
Victoria's been waiting patiently.
Yeah,
asking
that's
me,
fine, Matt. No, thank you. Vic.
Yeah, so I think there was a couple of issues there, weren't there? So I think when we're talking about notifying the fire service, and it is right, it's when it's in occupation as well, we're talking about essential firefighting equipment, aren't we? So if essential firefighting equipment goes down, it's going to be down more than 24 hours. That's when we've got to notify so the regulator, sorry, in the fire service. So that was one. And again, when we're saying when we're going to pick these up and when we're going to know about that, we're also obliged, aren't we, to make sure that we inspect those items. So all firefighting equipment has got to be inspected on a monthly basis now, hasn't it? So hopefully the provision that we already add in, people have either extended that or they've got somebody else in place to do that. I know we've extended our provision to make sure it covers that. So then, yeah, we're collecting that information quicker, and that can change on a monthly basis. Like you say, you wouldn't change the drawing for that, but we'd need a central area, wouldn't we, that people can go to make sure that that's updated, or a central person, or however that's going to be done. I know, some people have gone to digital twinning, whereas you've got, your digital representation of the building, and that could be, it's like reverse BIM, isn't it? Really, it's already built, and then you've deconstructed it and put it together as a design, and then each area that you click on that building, you can actually attach the information behind that, so that can be live information, and you can actually, or that can be auditable, so you're putting new information on top of the old, but you can still get to the old information. So there is that way of doing it, isn't there? But again, then you've got to make sure you've got the right people doing that. And you still, everybody that's doing those monthly inspections of your firefighting equipment is going to be the people that can feed into that. So it's always live. That's the sort of only way at the minute I can think that's going to keep it as live as you're going to get it. And like, somebody else has said, you're never going to have it as live as we'd like.
I want to bring Colin in. Before I do that, we keep kind of straying onto question 8 quite a bit. And question 8 includes, as Paul pointed out, three other questions. So Jess, could you put the question and answers up again? There we go. Right, so if we look at question 8, it's gone. Jess. There we go. Question 8. Maintain a live record of building safety data with auditable changes and retention of historic information. So I think that kind of sees quite nicely. Colin.
Yes, Jonathan mentioned AOVs, a subject close to my heart. Surely it's about the servicing and maintenance of these systems. If you've got the right people, to quote Victoria, the right people doing it, they would be able to advise the building owners of anything that needs doing if there's something wrong. I mean, I'm not exaggerating if I say at least 5 times a month I get phone calls from inexperienced contractors, mostly fire alarm contractors, asking me about how to maintain and service a particular smoke control damper for a system that has been installed for a few years, and they've been just going along once every 12 months or 6 months, flick a switch, see that it operates and then closes it. And when it doesn't operate, they think, oh Christ, what have we got to do about this? It's about the competency. That's, Paul's probably going to agree with me on this. It's about the competency, experience of the service and maintenance people, because if an AOV system's commissioned at handover, it's fairly passive, I suppose. Yeah, you've got to check it and maintain it, but you've got to know the people who are checking and maintaining these things have got to know what they're looking at, and more importantly, know what to do if something's not right. That's
Absolutely.
what I got.
I don't think anybody would disagree with you on that.
Anybody want to come in on that at all? Okay, question 8, I'll read it again. Maintain a live record of building safety data with auditable changes and retention of historic information.
I agree with Johnny that we need to make sure that what we're not doing is overcooking it and not considering the specific information that is probably referenced in the fire risk assessment or the safety case, and therefore it needs to be proportionate from a point of view of what's critical. But the ones that I just showed on the Regulation 38 examples, I think are probably quite a good ones to actually build out from.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the key point, this is where I was coming back from, is the as-built drawings. Yes, you maintain. The issue is, and this is part of the BIM record that you're looking at, is if for some reason, and I'll use AOVs because that seems to be the one that we're talking about at the moment. If an AOV has to be changed because it's broken, and you take it out and you put a new one in, then that's when you need to be keeping your change information, so that you may well not have gone to, you may well not put it through building control because it's a simple change, but you need to keep, who did it, well, are they competent, and what have they done, and what have they replaced it with, and where's all the information that goes with it, and then that has to go into the file with the AOV control system, etc., because you've done it. And I think the issue that we've got in the short term, and I think Colin was alluding to it before, is we know, Colin and I know, how many awful systems there are out there that have not been maintained, and I'm assuming that in all these safety cases, somebody's got their most recent inspection which says it doesn't work. Now that's an assumption in the first case because they may not even know that they need to put it in their safety case. And then they've got to write down what is their corrective action. So just like any quality system, your systems, I've been advised this system's not working. Right, what's your corrective action? And hopefully, what's your action to prevent recurrence? Because if you realise how expensive it's going to be to fix it the first time, don't let it happen again. And this is what I think. Well, this is what I mean by change management and record keeping. Is if you physically change something, you've got to know, you've got to have that route. But also, in terms of this system of your live safety building data, you've got a fire alarm inspection. You've got to keep all the records. You're now starting to realise you're going to have fire door inspections. You've got to keep all the records. And in keeping all these records, you're building up a whole record of, if you do nothing, exactly how long you've been doing nothing for. And then we add into that smoke control systems. We add into it ventilation systems with fire resisting duct. And we add into that fire dampers. And when you start, and this is all the information and the records that people they're going to have this report for all these different things going into this management system. And that's the key point, because having got all that information, you can't just, I've got the information, I've done the inspection. No, because there's actions that need to be completed from that. And the point is you've now hopefully, or whatever is, or riskily, you've now kept potentially a record of all the stuff that needs to be done that you haven't done. And
yeah, this is the thing. It's all right having loads of information. We've got loads of information in a lot of cases. It's just you've got to find it and use it, haven't you? Otherwise, it's useless. Johnny,
but it is. Don't forget, it is to protect yourself, because if you do nothing in all these instances, you're leaving yourself open hugely to the safety of the building.
Absolutely.
So less is not more in this case.
No,
because you're then at criticism for not keeping it and not doing it.
Absolutely. It's management, as you say. Johnny.
Yeah, I think I just had a question on whether the word live is actually a good word to have here. live to me would make me think that like it's always right, always up to date, as in, you know, and I think that's not a possibility. You know, if a AOV breaks, most of them are dumb, and they do not have they do not have sensors on them, in the sense of they are not calling a call center to say they're broken, because they're also not used by people, as it like a lift. When a lift breaks,
Yeah.
you know about it straight away because everyone in the block phones up and complains, you know, and most of the lifts do have sensors calling their call centers. Lots of the other equipment doesn't. So if a pump fails on a sprinkler system, how do you know about it? And I think sometimes this language of, oh, you have to have everything 100% live is, you know, it's a bit like as Victoria's talking about going towards that digital twin world or whatever. You know, is that a possibility with old and existing buildings? You know, you know, most of these things, you know, it's not possible. So yeah, I just cautious of the word live
George,
Yeah,
record.
J-
I don't know
George,
what the correct
George.
language should be there, but
Yeah, can I just say I agree with you, Johnny. The point is what we're trying to differentiate there, and these questions have come out of the community. So it may be that we replace live with up to date. Yeah.
I don't know the exact correct phrasing. I just think, you know,
Yeah.
you don't want to, I suppose what we don't want to be doing is saying to people, you have to have stuff live, and people thinking they have to go and replace it with sensors. I think that's where we want to get to, but I don't think as an industry we are anywhere near close.
No,
I
I agree. But what we're trying to do here is also educate the clients that having a safety case report done, ticking the box like a fire risk assessment, and it only has to be done every 5 years, perhaps. Yeah. That they've satisfied the requirements simply by having a report done. Right. So if the report, if things that are in that report that are relevant as far as safety is concerned, if they change, like you know, Paul was saying earlier, then that needs to be recorded. So that needs to be updated.
Agree with it. I just think it's just maybe just a bit of on the terminology. And going back to, I think it was Paul was saying, so with some of this stuff you need a lot of information. I agree, you need there's a lot of information that make up some of these systems, but I think from a day-to-day operational point of view, it needs to be simplified enough that people going out there maintaining these and who are going to pick up faults can understand it. So a good example is you may have a ventilation, pressurized ventilation system in the building. You know, how do you train people be able to spot when that doesn't work? So for instance, you could go and test that system and you flick the switch and people can say the motor's running, it's operational. But you know, if the door doesn't swing open when it's meant to, then the system isn't actually working. Instead of trying to teach people loads of crypto, like sometimes the how you can train people on these systems can be very simplified. And I think, you know, if you get the big ticket items right, then your building is going to be a lot safer, because it's, you know, and just from experience, things like that, you know, like you can teach anybody with a little bit of technical background how a lift should operate in a fire scenario, and it's very simple to test that stuff. That doesn't mean they're in any way qualified to service a lift or to do any of the more complicated items on a lift, but it should be very easy on a weekly basis for caretakers in the building to test, is the lift operational from a fire perspective point of view, because it's, you know, it's turning on the fire alarm and clicking on, you know, testing the trigger on level 1 and seeing what happens. So I think it's, although there is a huge amount of information in here in the making sure a safety case is up to date, I think there is the two parts. There's the really simple information, which is in the up-to-date stuff, about the stuff, and then there is the more in-depth testing, which is sort of the next stage. And then the third higher stage is if you were replacing a system. So obviously if you're replacing one AOV for another AOV or whatever it may be, well, obviously then you have to get really into the specification and the technical details. So I think it's always like the levels of it, and the biggest risk is at the bottom, at the simple level. You know, is is your lift operate? Is your AOV operating? You know, is your smoke control operating? You know, those really, you know, it's those ones in existing buildings where the failures happen, and we've seen it time and time again, where you go in and people are saying systems are operational and they're in no way operational. I've never, you know, and a lot of that falls back into how we do fire risk assessments, which in my opinion is completely inadequate. Because
George, you had your hand up. Did you have a specific point you actually wanted to make yourself?
No, I made it. So
you made it.
That's fine. Yeah,
that's fine. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, so just coming back to this live thing, and then I take Johnny's point, but the point is what the reason that we're using live, I think, is if you actually read BS 9999, if you look at what you're supposed to be doing every day, every week, etc. Now the point is you've got to keep records of that, because positive records are just as good as negative records. But the point is yes, you need something to say when somebody goes in on week 7 and finds something wrong. Then they don't ignore it for another 4 weeks.
Exactly.
And another 4 weeks, because it's gone in the pile of reports. And I think this is the bit that we're talking about. So it's not live as such, but it's not far out of date, if that makes sense. Because, you know, if for instance you've got an AOV system and 2 of them have failed, you have no smoke control. You know, these things are you know, they're not as simple as we want them to be. And you know, some of these, the worst thing is if you start to look at things like fire dampers and things like that, they're completely hidden, and it's a real pain in the bum job to go above a ceiling to make sure that a powered fire dampers are open and closed every week. So you've got to put into place systems that make this live. And again, the live part of it, I think, comes after the problem that's been found. Because if a problem's been found, it's live because it's a problem for the people in the building at that point.
That's a good point.
They don't know. They're relying on you. And you know, one of the things I always say is you know,
mechanicals, just I'm not sure if we lost the signal there, but things like those mechanical smoke dampers are never going to be checked every week. That's like, look, let's be realistic. There is not enough capacity in the industry and in housing associations and others to do that. There is just an absolutely, it's impossible. They are going to be checked on a weekly basis. I don't know anyone else here from a housing association, if they want to chip in on that. Those types of levels of checks are never, ever, at least in the next like 5 or 10 years happening, because it's just, even from a financial cost perspective, it's not possible to do that.
How frequently would you say that they should be done then, Johnny?
They'll be done on the level that they're set out in things like SFG 20, so probably 6 monthly or yearly. Definitely never, no more than that.
Well, it has
Paul,
to be, it has to be
you're
monthly.
back.
It has to be monthly, doesn't it, under the legislation for those items?
But I don't think that's how. I don't think that's, well, I don't know. It depends on who you ask and how you interpret it, and what is, because it doesn't get into all what equipment is covered in that. So I don't think
it does give you an indication of what equipment is covered for essential firefighting equipment, and it says monthly. That's what we have to do.
Essential firefighting equipment is not a mechanical smoke dampener. Firefighting equipment is the stuff they use, which is lifts, dry risers, wet risers, even a fire alarm smoke alarm system doesn't get covered. A sprinkler system doesn't. So yeah, they will, because if they will consider that potentially part of it. But you know what we're talking about here is those items: dry risers, wet risers, lifts.
You have to check those as well. You have to check the dry risers. They are. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what. But things like smoke control doesn't get covered. AOVs won't get covered. Even alarm panels, because they won't get covered. An evac system will get covered, because again, that's a firefighting system. For firefighters only, but yeah, door control and other stuff like that, none of that has to get checked. So I think people need to be realistic on what is required and where we're going, and even the cost of doing those monthly checks is a huge uplift on current situations. Yeah, I think most of us do the alarms monthly anyway. I'm sure a lot of us do. I know we do. And it depends if your AOVs are attached to it. You know, some of them are, and then I suppose you're checking them as well. But I get your point. Not everybody.
Let me bring Paul back in, because he's now online. Paul is now live.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I just looked out the window and BT just disconnected me for a few minutes. So sorry about that. Sorry. So I've just sort of come halfway through back in this conversation. But in terms of what are you saying that these things aren't covered, Johnny? In which document? So smoke control, fire alarm systems, and anything under etc. are all covered in 9999, which is reference from 9991, which is the management of apartment blocks. So and it is very, very clear. Look at Annex Annex I, and it tells you very, very clearly what you have to do daily, monthly, weekly, and this is the point. One of the other issues with smoke control systems, particularly, is they're passive. Okay, so unless you go and test them by setting an alarm off, they don't work, because they're sitting there waiting for an alarm. So you don't know when any of the parts in it move or do anything else. One of the things you said earlier, these things don't, they don't message somebody. They can, but you have to pay for it at the start. And this is the problem. Everything is available and relatively cheap, but people don't want it. But what they're doing is certainly from fire and smoke safety, you keep ignoring these things, which is what everybody's been doing. I did hear, I was worried that there was, somebody said they'd just been on a level 4 risk assessment course, and they didn't mention smoke control and ventilation fire dampers. And I'm thinking, well, what's the point? These are the things that are there to protect you actually in the fire. They're hidden, but if they don't work, you're in trouble. And so, yet they're not in a risk assessment requirement.
So Paul,
but like if just say like, sorry, but I just want to be very clear. There's a difference between what's required under the Building Safety Act and the supplementary legislation and other things, and obviously BS 9999 is a code of practice. It's not a legislative requirement, and there is where the industry needs to ultimately get to, and when you say some of these things are easily done and are relatively affordable, that's
I didn't say they're affordable. I said they're expensive, but they have to be done. Just take the Grenfell inquiry. Just take why did you not follow this code of practice when your building burnt down? Answer that question, and you've got to bear this in mind. These things can wreck companies, they can wreck people, they can wreck the people who work for you, because unfortunately, this is now a fact of life. I'm talking with contractors all the time where they won't do anything because they're so risk averse. And you cannot keep relying on, it doesn't tell me in the law not to do this, because you will be found at fault.
I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just saying just a reality of where we are and where we need to get. So going back to Victoria, like you test your fire alarms every month. I know lots of other housing associations who do not. They do them. They definitely do not get tested every month. There is no requirement to test them every month. And when they do get tested, most of these get tested individually. They don't get tested as a whole in a cause and effect point of view. So, for instance, the lifts will get tested, but they get tested to make sure that they're operating. It doesn't mean that they're actually operating correctly. And in huge numbers of instances, I found that they actively don't. This is very. I've never been to a building where all of the main fire safety systems have been tested, that they have all worked as per their designed, as per the cause and effect. I've yet to come across a single building where, now some of them have been really minor, tiny issues, but I've yet to come across a building, where everything works exactly how it should, as it was designed. So for me, a lot of this is just the ideal of where the industry should get to. Let's focus on, using data and BIM and best practices, where focus on the stuff that's going to make the residents the safest. And if some of the advice goes to clients about, like as you said, even that's why I'm saying even the word live for me brings up fears that if you go too far, organizations will just go, I'm ignoring it because there's no way we can do it. While if you get to a point of view where you're focusing on the absolute critical stuff that's going to make the most amount of difference, that's realistic and as I think somebody said earlier, George yourself, proportionate. If you get to that stage, then people adopt it and they will do it, and therefore people are safer, residents are safer. If you go too far with some of this stuff, it gets ignored. And I think that's sort of my viewpoint on it. There is where I would love the industry to be to, but where it's where can we get to?
Okay, just can we scroll down? Because just what we were talking about just now, if we look at number 22, and this is about addressing compliance holistically. So considering the building as a system with interconnected components, which a couple of you have touched on over the last few minutes. So I thought it made sense to move down to that. Vic, you have something to say.
What in the chat? I was just saying under the RRO, it was my belief that the fire alarm needed to have a weekly test. So that's not an in-depth one. That's to test that the system's working, and that's why we do it weekly. So we might, I don't know if we're talking about maintenance or if we're talking about testing. There's two different things there, isn't there? Which I think Johnny did sort of allude to as well. So don't want to get that confused.
Sure. Okay, well, compliance, holistic compliance, comments. Look at the building as a whole, a complete system of interconnect. George.
I think we should pick on a couple of people because obviously we're a few of us.
We need to bring. We need to bring some more people into this, don't we? Let's have a look. Emma. What's your view on holistic compliance? Okay.
I think she's gone off it. Yeah. Oh no, she's. Oh, her mic's.
Oh, okay, no problems, Emma. Her mic's broken. Right, Glenn Braun.
Hello.
Hi.
I was kind of interested more in the last point, to be honest. I should have spoken up then, but I think I think some of these guidelines and regulations, kind of listening to what Johnny's been saying, are so ambiguous. What does holistic compliance mean? I mean, you're either compliant or you're not. And every element that is required to be checked, and we're building our platform on that basis, trying to help make that easier for housing associations, for example, or local authorities or developers. What does holistic compliance mean? And yes, the building is a connected, interconnected system of relative components, but I just wondered what that actually means.
Yeah, what it's intended to mean, Glenn, is that simply going and doing a fire door check in itself doesn't really address it. It's a matter of looking at compartmentation, for example.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Yeah,
so all these elements are interconnected, which I understand, but each element, as we were just discussing, has to be checked weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, and that all pulls together to provide this holistic compliance. Surely, I mean,
yeah.
some stuff is quite obvious, and some stuff is less. It's in terms of what the stuff I've heard, the stuff I've read, particularly over the last 6 months, from people who are supposed to be giving the diktat as to what you're supposed to do. So no wonder people are confused.
Yeah, I think in part, obviously we're looking at things. What we can contribute is the information side of things, and therefore, I think having a relationship between what the individual assets are, what systems they're part of, and how those systems then interact with other systems to be able to address the particular risk. Now, unless we actually have the information about the assets and how they're connected to systems, which quite frankly, generally, the asset information that we have doesn't give that type of interconnection, unfortunately, then it means that doing the overall compliance and therefore relating that back to the safety management system, that you've got some broken links there. So that's really what that's intended to do.
And I think what we're trying to do is, obviously we're a commercial outfit, but for the good of the sector, and that sounds really cheesy, but we're actually trying to work with, because every housing association, for example, has got a different system that does a different thing. It's a lot of it. This is about interoperability between systems that can speak to each other. As you know, George, we've talked about this loads. So things like Dwellin, for example, who a lot of people use, we just build an API so we can talk to those systems and we can provide that holistic view and that holistic compliance view of that particular building. It's not about, it's about doing that more often than not and working with others in our sector, which is a new thing, I think, to a certain extent.
Yes, agreed.
Simon Connery.
How are you doing? Yeah, I agree that holistic and even systemic and viewing things as a system can be a little bit vague. But there's a sentence in the 1971 version of the CP3 Code of Practice, and it says the difficulty of making comprehensive recommendations capable of covering every possible risk should be appreciated, and an intelligent application of the principles and the recommendations which follow is therefore essential. So I think they're saying that, you can't list every single hazard and every risk and every area of compliance individually, but you would expect somebody with the competence to maintain, for example, a building safety case or to write a building safety case report, that they have the intelligence to know what is important, what needs to be added, and how words should be interpreted. Like, for example, live as opposed to up to date, because I do agree that live could be interpreted in a way that makes it impossible to comply with.
Okay, anyone else? Bands on hold. Let me see who else we've got here. Daniel, are you there?
Yeah.
Daniel, holistic building management.
I think there's a kind of challenge here. So often I'm kind of brought back to thinking about the whole making tax digital thing, which I think went fairly well. I mean, I don't maybe I just don't know enough people in the industry, but it seemed to go fairly well to me, because you could build standard APIs to make calls of those systems, and actually a lot of people have made a lot of money building digital tools for you to manage your finances off of. And in fact, the thought of getting a bunch of papers through your door or having a bunch of papers in your house somewhere to manage all that stuff would just be absolutely ridiculous now. So the challenge that's kind of brought on with buildings is that it's almost like you have to design the system every single time, because the buildings are designed differently every single time. And I think that if we're going to get anywhere close to it, we have to kind of start to think about a standardized system for digitizing any component. And off of the back of that, you know, you have a sort of plug and play approach where you can, you know, you can link up an application to any building. You know, and that should really be the idea that we're striving for if we want to understand. You know, I guess that word holistic is a bit of a buzzword, as some folk have been saying, but like, I guess if we want to understand the building as a data model, and then be able to kind of, you know, gap analysis or fill that in or continue that throughout, I think that we really need to start thinking about how we standardize the digital aspect of it across all buildings. You know, there needs to be a system at the very least in the UK that does it for every single building we have. Otherwise it's an impossible task.
Sure.
And as someone who's like quite involved in automation, I find that that's the biggest tripping point for any automation, is that like you get someone who does a great automation on a project and it only works for that project, and then you have to run the entire startup cost again for the next project. You know, so you really want something that, you know, you want a kind of framework. And I think that Building Smart and IFC are trying to do this in some regard, is, you know, basically make that framework so that, you know, with each new building, you can take the application you've got to, I don't know, you might even end up with like micro applications, like, okay, this is the application that checks the fire alarms. This is the application that does that. And you have different vendors that kind of provide those little micro applications, just like you have different kind of vendors that provide you all sorts of financial, you know, tools. But the point is they all need to be able to plug in to your building every single time. And I think without that, like, the task is really, really hard. Like our fire teams, like it surprised me coming from architecture to the fire safety team, you know, because I'd be working, I'd see a lot more documentation about, you know, existing buildings in the fire team. And it just really surprised me all the time, like how badly managed that information is. You know, it's like, even if we did want to completely digitize it into a system, there's like missing things all over the place. And then it's like, okay, well, even if we have all the information, structuring that information, it's kind of difficult, because
so it's
everyone
about,
wants
the
to do
information management and also that word again, standardized, that keeps popping up, which brings me with a great sig onto Alan, because Alan is working very hard at the moment, over the last few months actually, on our paper publication for standardizing fire door inspections. Alan, tell me about what your feelings on holistic building management.
Okay, thanks for that. I am aware that there's a number of people in today's group meeting that haven't been involved in the creation of this document, but excuse me, as under a BIM for Housing working group over the last year, and it has taken all year, we've adapted a healthcare reference document on how to inspect fire doors. And the original reference document said you should inspect them 3 ways. You should have a type 1 inspection for brand new doors, a type 2 inspection for existing doors, and a type 3 existing ongoing PPM inspection for doors that have previously been either type 1 or type 2 inspected. Now, the type 1 inspection is very prescriptive, and it's examining the golden thread of information compared to what's actually been installed. So you should ensure that it's very robust. The type 2 inspection, however, allows you to be more pragmatic, because quite clearly you can't rip out every single door, every fire door in the country where you haven't got a perfect golden thread of information and where it's not 100% perfect as tested. So this allows you to take a pragmatic view on the doors, depending on the location of the doors and their criticality. And I think, well, I believe we've successfully adapted the healthcare version into a residential version. And for anybody who hasn't been in the working group, and that is most of the people on today's Teams meeting, I'd be very happy to send you what is just about the final draft ready for sign off and issue in January. But yes, coming back to the question.
Yeah, sorry, can I interrupt you? Put that, as Ben has just done, put that into the chat, and
Right.
We'll do that. Sorry, Alan.
Okay, so taking that background aside, what we're saying is with existing doors that are unlikely to be perfect, and where you have got a golden thread of information, some of them might be more than 30 years old, you've got to take a pragmatic risk management view. And so and one of the things you have got to do is look at the fire doors in the context of everything else in that building, and the size of the building, and the complexity of the building, and the the level of risk of that building. So bearing in mind that it's come from a healthcare background, if you imagine a healthcare estate, they might have a number of buildings. Some might be like a one-story training room. Another one might be a maternity unit on the 8th floor of a tower block. So you're looking at the location of these doors, and you're looking at everything holistically. You're looking at all the fire safety measures in place. So I believe that you can look at a building holistically, and you don't have to have every fire safety measure in that building that's perfect, because some things can be counteracting and compensating for others.
Interesting. Thank you. Any, as I say, if you want an advanced copy of that, excuse me, put it in the chat. Anybody got any comments on what Alan's just said?
Yeah, Vic said something interesting.
Yeah, she did. I couldn't read it. Vic, what were you saying?
Sorry, I keep coughing, so if I start coughing, I've got a cold at the minute. Yeah, so I'm just saying, yeah, we're being asked to renew doors that have not got bi-directional testing, aren't we? I mean, I was just looking, just thinking about the comments there about having doors that are 30 years old. Probably most of us, won't be able to have doors that are 30 years old because they're not bi-directional tested, and we've been asked to renew them. So we're renewing them. And so that just makes me think, yeah, that's not being holistic, is it? So in one way we're being asked to have to look at things holistically, and we should be looking at things holistically, but then we're being asked, especially on FRAs, now we need to be renewing those doors because it's not bi-directional tested. But we have got, we've got full alarms in, compartmentation is completely intact, and we've got sprinklers in. So holistically, we should be able to do what you've just said, really, and look at the door in that viewpoint. But
who's asking you, Vic?
Well, it was legislation that we had to have bi-directional tested doors on blocks of flats over 18 metres.
It's legislation, is that right, Alan?
Over 18 metres.
No, I mean the fire door industry. I'm going to be sort of fairly cynical here, but the fire door industry is driven, I would argue, by test houses and fire door manufacturers who would love you to replace every door in every one of your buildings. But some of your doors are probably fit for purpose and could probably be risk managed, and some of them could probably be certified under BRE LPCB LPS 1197 as being suitable and sufficient for their location, providing the client understands the limitations of that certification and is happy that they understand the limitations, and they've had them expertly assessed.
I'd be surprised if the legislation actually explicitly says that you've got to but is that right, Vic?
That's how I'm interpreting it. And again, obviously, the legislation, as it always is
a bit
subjective.
vague.
It's
Yeah.
subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so what we're being, and it's also coming through on the FRAs. You need to have. Can you show that that's bi-directionally tested? No, we can't. And while it's in situ, you never can. So if that's the requirement of the FRAs, then the only way we can do that is by renewing the door. But then it's a snapshot in time again, because as soon as you leave that property, anything can happen to that door. So that's what I'm saying is that's not holistic, is it? You know, we should be able to look at what else is there. We know we've got very good compartmentation. We know that it's regularly, reviewed. We know that we've got sprinklers in place, etc., etc. So realistically, we should be able to leave that door in place. And then, of course, once we've replaced it anyway, when we're going and having a look on an annual basis at those front entrance fire doors, we're looking against the TRADA questions really as a base of what to look at, and looking at that door. Yeah, it's got this, it's got that, it's fine. But obviously, again, it's subjective to the person who's looking at. Even if you've got a set of questions, it's subjective. So I agree with the holistic view. Look at what else is there. But this is what we're being asked to do, and this is what's also being picked up on the FRAs, is to replace these doors.
Who's asking you to do it, Beck?
Well, I interpret the legislation as that anyway, but our fire risk assessors, that are external assessors, are asking for them to be done and asking if they got bi-directional testing. We've even been asked off the fire service if they got bi-directional testing, and I know a lot of other RPs are doing the same.
So how many doors will you be potentially replacing in the next 12 months?
We've nearly done them all, to be fair. So 1,200.
So yeah. So from organisations I've seen it taking a different view. So yeah. So which is part of the problem though in the industry, isn't it, at the moment? So stuff sometimes just isn't clear, and what some people think is, some people will go, well, that's best practice, but not a legislative absolute requirement. And other people will be, well, I see it as a requirement. And some of this is tough. As I say, just simply on to weekly testing, like, organizations I've been involved with in the past, or organizations I know of, say absolutely no weekly testing, no requirement. So we won't do weekly testing. We will do monthly testing, but not weekly, because it's a fourfold increase. And if you have you have 300 blocks, that's a huge amount. So
that's a very expensive interpretation, isn't it?
Well,
that you have to make. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, we know Bex's, they've ripped all theirs out virtually, haven't they, George?
Well, what
I was just going to say sorry, George. I was just going to say I was at London Build a few weeks ago. I don't know if anybody else went to that, and there's a really good fire safety stage and loads of really good chats on there. I was absolutely astounded that Neville Tomlin from Southampton City Council just said they didn't check any of their doors. They just ripped them all out and they've replaced them all. And is there any wonder, as Alan said, that there's cowboy fire door firms out there where the perfectly good doors that need no remedial work are being replaced at high cost? No wonder they haven't got any money. It's absolute insanity. And until that's regulated, that's just going to continue.
Clearly, what Vic is doing is the best scenario. If you've got the money and you can afford to replace all your doors. One of my concerns is that people are not getting robust fire door protocols in place, and they're going to manage and maintain them so that they keep to that standard. Because the concern is that in 5 years' time, I'm not saying your doors, Vic, but it could be that other organisations, they've got the same scenario in 5 years' time, because maybe they've not been installed under third-party certification, maybe not all the components are as tested, maybe they're not going to be managed and maintained. And people, if people are going to replace all their doors, the one thing they need to have for sure is a robust set of fire door protocols where everything joins up, and you're going to make sure that you're not having to do the same thing in 5 or 10 years' time.
Really, really. Well, that's what we're hoping to do, aren't we? Paul.
The only thing that I would potentially, well, there's 2 points I want to make, but the first one is on the fire doors. If they're very old, then have a look and see what legislation or guidance was in place at the time, because you only have to actually meet the legislation of when the building was constructed. So if the legislation was in place at the time that said you could do this, then you're absolutely fine. Now, there might be other reasons why they might be unsound, but if they met the requirements at the time the building was built, then you don't have to change anything. The other thing is that if you think fire doors are bad, you haven't even thought about doing your fire dampers yet, because I bet I can go into any of the buildings that any of you are related to, and they've got fire dampers in, that there's a high proportion of those that weren't installed properly, and it will be obvious. And when you have your next fire door inspection, fire damper inspection, that people are doing it more competently now, rather than just checking that they open and close, and you potentially going to have a completely different issue there.
Daniel.
Yeah, thanks. No, just a question, really. Actually, I mean, maybe a leading question, but I guess, you know, hearing the conversation here, I'm sort of wondering this, like in the scenario that was kind of noted there of the doors being completely replaced. I do wonder, and then this is the part that's kind of the question part, is like how much is it to commission an inspection of that door, get the person inspecting the door to add the certificate or dig up the certificate you've already got, which may or may not be there, and then digitize that, versus someone who may come along and say, look, if I install the new door, I'm going to provide you with every piece of information that is required under the current legislation. And I kind of wonder then, in that scenario, it's like, okay, yeah, it's definitely better for the environment to keep the door you've already got. But in terms of like your own kind of business operations security, in terms of your legal security, in terms of having all the information you need, and so on, I do kind of wonder, although I kind of feel it may be in one direction, I do kind of wonder if like that's why it makes more sense a lot of the time to replace, because you don't have the money
to replace it than go through all the rigmarole.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. I've not got experience of doing that process, but it just is something that kind of I wonder about. Yeah.
Just one observation on that, Daniel, is that I've spoken to several councils who have done that. I know one that's replaced 4,000 doors, and the doors that they have, the new doors that they've had installed, over 70% of them have failed inspection. Yeah, so you're replacing a door that probably was working with now there's no excuse for that. That's down to competence of the people that are installing it, but that's a common complaint that I've heard of. Alan.
That's incredible.
Yeah, three things now. The first one is that I take issue with what Paul said about the fact that all you have to do is see when the door was installed and whether it met the standards at the time, because that's overridden by the fire safety order that says that a door has now got to be suitable and sufficient for its location. The second thing I would say is that you're absolutely right that a brand new door might not be installed correctly. You've got to look at the complete golden thread of information, and just because you've got a brand new, fully certified, manufactured fire door, you can make a complete horlicks of installing it. And it's out there in the public domain where that's been happening on numerous occasions going back a long time. And I forgot what you said actually, George, there. If you could just remind me what your last point was.
Just that the installation may not actually address the problem, and you end up with a door that probably was working okay, but you didn't have the right certification against it, perhaps, yeah, or it hadn't been tested for that, and you're replacing it with one that doesn't do the job.
Yes, you're coming back to this golden thread of information. The point I was going to make is the test houses and the fire door manufacturers will love you to go out and buy a brand new door. If you're going to be really cynical, you'd say they'd also love you to install that door really badly, so that you've then got to replace it again in a few years' time. And this is where the whole system is flawed. Unless, and sorry, the other point I was picking up, George, is that it's not just the fire door installers who have to be competent. It's the client who has to fully understand how a brand new fire door's got to be signed off competently, and it's then got to be managed and maintained competently.
Yes.
Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Has anybody got anything pressing they want to say? I'll take that as a no. We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We've got another one in 90 minutes, I think, which will be question 1. And I think some of you are coming along to that. How do we prevent incorrect design, selection and installation of fire safety products? So if any of you are ready for some more, come along to that one. Failing that, if nobody's got anything else, I'll just say see you. Well, we'll see you next year, I guess, won't we? If you're not coming later.
Richard, do you want to just summarise what we're actually going to do with this?
Oh, sorry. Right. This is we're going to obviously take on board this meeting. All our meetings are recorded and high point notes written up, which are sent out to you. It will be probably next week. We'll be taking on board all the comments on that we've had by email, obviously today, and rejigging, rewriting those questions, which will then be put out as published in probably January as recommendations, if you like, from BIM for Housing. We're doing quite a number of these actually. That will be coming out in January. You'll all receive a copy, and you'll all receive a draft to actually input into that.
Yeah, so I just thought it was worth just throwing up here, Richard, because we sort of assume people know where this is, but that's our website.
Sorry, yeah.
And basically, the work streams and the working groups, we actually have them all published here, so that you can actually see, for example, what we've been doing in the fire safety work stream. And you see the questions that we had from last week. We've got the recording of the session itself, so you can actually, if you wish, you can then replay and go back and see what I tend to do with this is I set it on a faster speed, and then just go through, and you can pick up quite a lot from that. What we also do is we put the high points into a document, so that we've actually got that all recorded. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that.
We'll email you those anyway, so you'll have that direct. But that's where, if you want to look at anything historic, that's where it is on BIM for Housing website.
Good.
Okay, guys. Well, see some of you later, and the rest of you next year, I hope. Take care.
Thank you.
Good Christmas, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Cheers.